Commission. He comes from a background as a community organizer and environmental advocate, having previously worked as both Canvas Director and State Director for Clean Water Action and a Program Director for Upstream, a national nonprofit focused on developing circular economy solutions. He launched his own law practice in 2016 with a diverse portfolio that includes energy aggregation, election law, small business, and nonprofit consulting, and is the current attorney to the Rhode Island Senate Environment and Agriculture Committee. He also serves as an advisor to the social enterprise Greenhouse and board members of ACLU Rhode Island, the Common Cause Rhode Island, and Clean Water Fund. So with this, James, I'll give this to you if you want to share your screen and to present.
All right, so let me just do that.
Thank you, and I'll mute.
All right.
If everyone can mute.
I think it should be up. Well, thank you, Pam, for that introduction. When I sent it over to you, I didn't realize it was going to be read out loud, and I feel like, ooh, wow, that was a lot to live up to here. So I appreciate it. My goal here is to spend about the next 10 minutes or so just kind of going through what is aggregation. And first, I should say a note about terminology, so that there's not a confusion here. Community choice aggregation is what we call the programs that are launched by cities that I'll go through. Green municipal aggregation is one version of that really promotes renewable energy, the acquisition of more renewable energy. I know Priscilla will talk about the climate pieces of aggregation. And so just so that we know, when we're talking about community choice aggregation, green municipal aggregation, we're really talking about the same thing, just kind of a different flavor of it. So I'll start just a little bit by describing who Good Energy is and why I ended up working with them and bringing this to you. So it's a company that's spent about 10 years managing aggregations across the country. It started out in, excuse me, it started out, I believe, in Ohio and Illinois, where it worked to aggregate energy loads for like large institutions, universities, nonprofits, hospitals, and has moved into the municipal field as it has expanded across the country as well. So just in New England, right now we're up to 53 clients in Massachusetts, 6 in Rhode Island, and our first client in New Hampshire. So we work all across the region, and obviously we're serving a significant amount of load, electricity load, and over 1 million residents across the New England region. So our current clients in Rhode Island are Providence, Central Falls, Portsmouth, Barrington, Newport, and South Kingstown. And the model of the green municipal aggregation that we'll talk about tonight is really a partnership project between Good Energy and the Green Energy Consumers Alliance to really promote local climate action while also working to change how we procure electricity for our communities. As Pam said at the beginning, I live in Providence. I work in Providence. Been a Rhode Islander for at least at this point, now that I start adding it up, 14 years now. And I've been really excited to be kind of at the forefront of bringing this particular program to Rhode Island. It's kind of something that I've really appreciated. So to describe what aggregation is, we're going to start with a step back of the kind of the core components of what our electricity system looks like. And if you look at your electricity bill, it's actually broken into these two components. So there's a supply, where is your electricity actually generated? And then there's your delivery. How does it get from where it was generated to your home so that you can use it? And part of the energy deregulation that happened about 98, so what is that, 20-some, 30-some, almost, over 30 years ago at this point. What that means is that who we choose for our electricity supply is in our control. So there's no longer are we required to get our electricity just from the utility. There's a opportunity for us to choose exactly where that supply comes from. I look at here, I missed an edit to this. So National Grid has this default service. So anybody that kind of, you move to Rhode Island, any community, you call National Grid, you'd be like, please hook up my electricity. There's gotta be a supply service for you. Like it just has to, otherwise when you turn on your lights, nothing would come to you. And that doesn't work for anybody. But there's got to be a default. And right now the default is from National Grid. It's called the Last Resort Service. They changed the name this year from Standard Offer to Last Resort. But at any time, somebody who wants to can choose their own supplier. Often we get at least in Providence, I get door-to-door salesmen. I'm like, hey, knocking on the door, show me your electricity bill. I got a better deal for you, the national grid. But there's also the empowerrhodeisland.org website that the Division of Public Utilities manages, which lists out different competitive supply products that you can have. Now there's a big issue with that supply. So yeah, there's the big issue with those suppliers is that if I'm just going out to buy electricity, I'm just one person and I don't use that much of it. The suppliers measure the amount in gigawatts. Like if they're talking about large amounts, I measure my usage in kilowatts. So if I say, hey, I'd like to buy electricity from you, they'd be like, well, here's my offer. Take it or leave it. You don't like it, go back to National Grid. So the idea behind aggregation is that if the supply is needed, the supply that is required for an entire community, if they come and say, we want a deal on electricity, now the suppliers start saying, okay, that's a lot of load. I think we can engage in a conversation and we can do some negotiation and perhaps we can get you something that works for you. So the idea behind aggregation is to say, let's put all of our buying power together and go out as a community to purchase our electricity as a singular unit rather than just one-on-one where we don't have a sufficient amount of power in that relationship. So the goals of doing that there's four key ones that I usually talk about with communities that are looking to do aggregation. The first one is that bulk purchasing. If we all buy together, we can get a lower price. It just kind of works out that way. The other piece is rate stability. So as we all know, National Grid's rates change every 6 months. So there's a winter rate and there's a summer rate, summer rate, and they constantly fluctuate. The idea behind aggregation is why don't we get a much longer stable rate, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and know exactly what rate we're going to be paying over that entire period. The other piece, and Priscilla will go into much more depth on this, is using and supporting clean energy. And the last piece that we'll talk about is also consumer choice, to give opportunities for each individual consumer to make the choice for what their electricity supply should look like, primarily around how much renewable energy do I want in this versus how much am I willing to pay, and allow the ability for individual consumers to have a choice in that decision. So the way that aggregation works is that we're able to secure competitive pricing. And by competitive pricing, what I mean is that in Massachusetts, all 43 of our clients have saved money over the life of their contract. So their residents have paid less for electricity than if they would have been on National Grid or Eversource. So by competitive, we mean cost savings. The reason why we're able to do that is National Grid, when it goes to buy electricity, it does so on 4 days every year. There's only 4 days. And everybody knows that they're going out to buy electricity for either a 12-month or an 18-month period on those 4 days. For us, and with our communities, we can go out to purchase electricity whenever it makes sense. If the market, and as just like gasoline prices, the price of a kilowatt hour of electricity fluctuates a lot. On any individual day out on the market, it could be a significant difference in what that price would be. And so when prices are low, we take our communities out to bid and say, prices are low for the next couple of weeks. And we know that because we've got all these different communities across the country that are bidding into the market. And we say, let's go ahead and secure a low rate for a longer period of time when the market's low. And the same thing about having that buying power of an entire community working together, or even as we're talking about now, a group of communities going out to purchase electricity together. We're able to command a more competitive rate in the market. One thing I always tell people is that while we promote savings in this and we have the potential for savings in it, we can never guarantee savings because, as I said, National Grid changes the rate 6 months from now. I don't know what that rate is going to be, so I can't guarantee that we'll be lower than it because I don't know what it is. So it's hard to compare and say that it'll be lower in the future because I just don't know what I'm comparing to. The next goal is stability. And I have an actual chart later in this presentation about it. But the idea is like, instead of this constant fluctuation every 6 months, what if we just flatline it? And so that an entire community knows exactly what that fixed rate is going to be for a longer period of time. Once again, and I'll leave this for Priscilla to really pick up, is about how we promote the new renewable energy development and are really able to increase the buying power for renewable energy, just like we are for our traditional sources. And the last one is expanding choice. So right now, what's really available is a standard offer service or last resort service and third-party suppliers. What the aggregation does is it opens the door for a community to say, what is the products that we want? So through aggregation, we change the default. so that now if somebody moves into a community, it's not National Grid that's the default service. It's the aggregation program that's been negotiated by the town or the city or town. And that's the default. And within the green aggregation model, we encourage the default to be above the state minimum for the amount of renewable energy that it includes. Yet we have options. If somebody wanted to opt up and say, I want 100% of my electricity come from renewable sources, we have an opt-up program for that. It generally costs a little bit more. There is a premium for purchasing the renewable energy credits for that. But that's an opportunity for individual customers to make a larger difference when it comes to providing more renewable energy or securing more renewable energy. And there's also an opt-down. Someone says, I understand having more renewable energy, but really what's most important to me is to minimize the cost. Times are tough, fixed income, for whatever reason, and to have an option to opt down to the state minimum for the amount of renewable energy, and that'll maximize the amount of savings when compared to the utility service. So here's just an example. Throw some numbers at this, turn the idea into something solid. So in Somerville, you can see the blue line indicates this is what Eversource, the utility in that part of Massachusetts, that's what their rates are since early 2017. Or from mid 2017 until really about now. And you can see 6-month fluctuations. Through the aggregation program that we're currently running with Somerville, the green line indicates 5% more renewable energy than the state minimum. And then the second bid that's at the far right end of that, where you see the little change in orange, they actually bump that up to 10% more renewable energy to the state minimum. And that's the price that they're paying. So instead of, as you see, jump to January 2020, if they were on Eversource, the utility service, they'd be paying 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, through the aggregation, they're having 10% more renewable energy and paying $10 or 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And now the basic, where there's no additional renewable energy, represents another 0.3 cents savings for the residents in Somerville. And so this is just an example. And we have charts for every one of our communities. They all follow generally the same type of structure here, although the rates that are being paid by the aggregation are different based off of the timing when the program launched. But in the end, you can see, like, yes, there's that period at the end of 2020 where the aggregation rate was higher than the utility rate. And once again, we didn't know that. We didn't know what that rate was when we went out to bid. But you can see that the difference between the aggregation rate and the utility rate over the life of that contract represents a significant savings that's there. And so the last piece that always to keep an eye on is what's the experience for individual customers. So the most important piece is that there's an automatic enrollment. So when the city or town council says, we're going to change the default, this becomes the automatic enrolled supply service for residents. So anybody that was on standard offer service or last resort service is automatically enrolled into the new town default program. The opt-out, before that happens, there's a significant education and outreach. So once we know what the rates are, we do direct mailings, multiple direct mailings to each individual customer. We host community meetings that in the pre and post-COVID world, there's a lot of in-person meetings with organizations, housing authorities, city councils, any sort of community organization, anybody that wants us to come talk about electricity, I'm there. You name it, I'll be there. I'm more than happy to talk about this. And we do as much education as possible so people know this is coming. And if they don't want to participate for whatever reason, they can opt out. No costs, no penalty, no fee. They can opt out before the program starts. The program's in the middle of it. They go, I don't want to be in this anymore. They can leave. They see the National Grid has a little bit of a lower rate for a period. They can leave and jump over there and come back later. There's no change fees. There's no change costs associated with it. The program exists. Come in, leave, come back. It's going to be there for you. National Grid continues to handle all the billing and maintenance. So the bill that individual customers have still comes from National Grid. The only thing that changes is the supply portion of the bill will be the aggregation instead of National Grid. And also same thing for maintenance. The delivery portion of the bill is still done by National Grid. The wires, the poles, all that's still managed by National Grid and maintained by National Grid. So the customer experience is that there's no change in the delivery service, as well as there's no changing in the bill and actually who they receive the bill to or how you pay your bill. And so anybody that has like a net metering, solar installation does not affect those programs at all. If you get bill credits because you're on a net metering program, then you get bill credits. For the electricity that you do need to purchase, it's going to come in at that lower aggregation rate. So the idea is that we're increasing the difference or we're increasing that value of the solar installations as well. The same thing goes for low-income discounts. Like 25% and 30% low-income discount rates still apply to the aggregation. That funding comes through National Grid and the rates we pay for distribution, and it's still applied to the full bill, so there's no change for low-income residents. And so that's that idea is, once again, we want to make this as seamless to participants so that there's not a massive change in their experience of their electricity bill. But at the same time, how do we make it the default and encourage people to both be in it, educate them that it's happening. So if they don't want to be in it, they're more than welcome to leave at no cost to themselves. So that's it in a nutshell. And I know I'm trying to keep us on time. So that's a quick review of what aggregation is and kind of how it operates. And then I'll pass it over to our other friends and then take questions at the end. I'm going to stop my screen here, sharing. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Next is Priscilla De La Cruz. She is the current director of Green Energy Consumers Alliance. Since 2009, and she, Green Energy Consumer Alliance, for those who are not familiar, it enables people and communities to access green energy choices in cost-effective and seamless way. Priscilla leads a small team based in Providence and performs strategic management and marketing, as well as coalition organizing in the local energy and environmental communities. She is a trusted advocate on clean energy and has worked to advance community choice aggregation in the Ocean State for the past 4 years. In June of 2019, she was elected as president of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island. She earned her bachelor's in business marketing at Rhode Island College and a master's in liberal arts with concentrations in management and sustainability from the Harvard University Extension School. Thank you so much, Priscilla, for being here. And I forgot to mention that if you have questions, you can write them in the chat in the meantime, because at the end, after the third speaker, we'll have answers to questions and comments and discussion. Okay, Priscilla, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you so much to CARI for, as a whole, for inviting us to talk about community choice aggregation. So I want to also say I really am appreciative of the effort that folks in Charleston have been leading, Kathy, Seek, and Catherine, for doing some mobilization work around spreading the word on community choice aggregation or green municipal aggregation, which is how we landed here today with you all on this Tuesday evening. So thank you so much. As Pamela mentioned, I am the Rhode Island director over at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And I think you all are seeing my screen well and can hear me well. Just quick nod. Okay, fantastic. So a little bit about Green Energy Consumers Alliance for the folks that are not familiar, although I do see some familiar faces and friends among the group. So Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we're a local nonprofit. We work to harness our power as energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. So we've been doing this going back to 1982, primarily out of the states of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We represent over 20,000 consumers or program participants. And a key way in which we achieve our mission is, one, by offering green energy options in the form of programs, whether it is to get a discount on an electric vehicle through a purchase or lease, just making it more affordable, or as an individual choosing to green your electricity and supporting more local renewable energy, or just providing access to more solar and energy efficiency options. We also do have a history of running a buyers group. Actually, back in 1982, that's how our organization got started. A group of heating oil consumers came together and banded together to help address the volatility in the heating oil market. And we were able to drive down the costs with working with dealers who were willing to offer discounts just to make heating oil more affordable. So as we know, heating with oil is not a choice. It comes with our homes that we either own or rent. So that stayed as a really important part of our mission throughout the years in terms of affordability. But through that program, we've been able to help consumers access heat pumps, more energy efficiency, solar panels. So that part of our membership remains active in accessing green energy options. So we try to make that as practical and cost effective for consumers across the board. So all that work that we do on the program side of things just really gives us the backbone to do strong advocacy at the state level. Our advocacy also does have impacts at the regional level when we're thinking about the regional power system. So just wanted to spend a little bit of time of that to give you some context as to how we got to green municipal aggregation. So as Jamie Rhodes mentioned, Green Energy Consumers Alliance made the decision back in 2015 to partner with Good Energy to create our favored flavor of community choice aggregation, which we call green municipal aggregation. And we've been expanding this model across Massachusetts. Back in 2016, it just started in Massachusetts with 2 communities, and now it has continued to grow and expand. And right now it is at about 15 cities or towns that are adding green to their municipal aggregation or community choice programs, but that list is growing. And actually there is a backlog at the Department of Public Utilities in Massachusetts for cities and towns that are waiting for their plans to be approved and reviewed. So just showing this graphic, I think it's a fun graphic, an illustration of showing of why we've devoted so much time as a nonprofit behind expanding the model of community choice aggregation in Massachusetts and then in Rhode Island. So in Rhode Island, I think we are where we're at, which is really exciting, and working with the first handful of communities that are moving forward with the model and that are looking to the model that we have developed with Good Energy in terms of adding more renewable energy as a strong climate action tool and as a way of displacing fossil fuels in our power system and adding more sources of renewable energy. So exactly how do we do this and how does our model achieve this? Well, we can add more green electricity. So in using the model of being able to aggregate our electricity in bulk and offer competitive pricing, and then being able to use that as a vehicle for adding more green electricity, we arrive at being able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And doing that through the bulk purchasing model really provides a strong competitive advantage in terms of supporting more renewable energy over a multi-year contract. So a city or town could, as Jamie explained, chooses to launch an aggregation program, let's say for a period of 3 years as an example, and says we want to use this not only to aggregate our electricity supply and drive and stabilize prices and better rates for our community members, but we also want to add green electricity. So for folks that have participated in the past in our green electricity program, so that is the individual sort of model of that program. Now we're just doing it at scale and saying a community as a whole can access green electricity versus one consumer or customer at a time. What we're really pleased to see in Rhode Island as we work to bring the program here with our partners is that communities are starting at a higher default of additional renewable energy. So that is really great because back in Massachusetts, when the program started, the default was at about 5%. And then the trend has been as communities are renewing their programs, they're adding more renewable energy and doubling up. So it's really great to see Rhode Island communities starting at 10% additional renewable energy. And as Jamie mentioned, just stressing that this is on the supply part of the electricity and that National Grid, our current utility, will still continue to be responsible for delivering that electricity to us customers and managing those poles and wires. So want to just sort of take a look at the bigger picture in terms of the impact, the climate impact of adding additional renewable energy. And that actually has to do with our renewable energy standards. So by law in Rhode Island, utilities like National Grid are required to provide a certain amount of renewable energy in their electricity mix. And that amount of new renewable energy increases every year. So for this year, we're at about 17.5% if new legislation is not passed, the current renewable energy standard will plateau right at about or under 40%. So what we're getting at here is that community choice aggregation, or our flavor green municipal aggregation, is just really trying to get ahead of state policy and saying, well, communities have that option to do that now. It's great. We do want 100% renewable energy standard by 2030. But in the meantime, what are the tools that communities have to really push the demand for additional renewable energy? And Jamie mentioned this point earlier in terms of competitive suppliers, that competitive suppliers, along with our current utility, have to be able to meet that demand for additional renewable energy. And that is in the form of renewable energy certificates. That is just the market mechanism for being able to track how much renewable energy is going onto the power grid, since we cannot track the individual electrons. I can get into the weeds there, but I won't. Happy to answer questions on the end at the end if there are more questions around how the renewable energy standard works and the role that renewable energy certificates play as we generate our renewable energy. So this is a graphic created by Good Energy that I love to always reference in terms of how exactly a community choice aggregation program can be a strong vehicle for adding additional renewable energy. So we see here the example of adding an additional 10% renewable energy beyond what the renewable energy standard requires is getting ahead of policy. And that is what we want more of. We want more demand on the market for renewable energy, and we want to get ahead of what is mandated by the renewable energy standard and really incentivize the additional growth of renewables in our state and across our region. So this is just a different version of the graphic that Jamie explained in terms of the options to consumers. So I won't get into explaining that because Jamie, of course, did an excellent job in covering the consumer options that are available in terms of being able to participate in an aggregation program versus going on your own with a competitive supplier. But what I want to just stress here in looking at the image from left to right is that a program model like green municipal aggregation and being able to aggregate that electricity supply and offer a default is what we're seeing here, right? Where folks have the option to opt out. And usually we'll get asked the question, why is it an opt-out program? Well, we're glad that the law was written as such. And actually back in 2017, we worked with Representative Deb Bradero from Jamestown to go ahead and make that important change because it would have just been too onerous for a city or town to have to manage a program that required community members to individually opt in. So instead, there's this transparent process for opting out and increasing awareness about what the model is and what your options are as a consumer, and getting folks that are in competitive supply to see what other options they have. Because as Jamie mentioned, there is a lot of misinformation, informational tactics that are being used by competitive suppliers. They just don't have the ability to offer the competitive rates to an individual customer that they would to a community as a whole. And next, I just wanted to go ahead and show this slide as a representation of the layers that are involved with a community choice aggregation program. So a community today, yes, can say, I want to go ahead and explore this model, but there are important layers to the process of community choice aggregation to ensure that there is that transparency and that vetting. So Jamie went into that. This graphic that we created just shows that there are decisions to be made at the community level in working with a consultant such as Good Energy, which is our preferred and only partner in being able to pass along green electricity to communities and securing the additional renewable energy that's required to meet what that default, for example, additional 10% is, and then being able to package that up for the consumer and ensuring that we are meeting that demand as consumers are receiving that supply and that source of electricity. And again, I'm not going to get into the weeds in terms of renewable energy certificates. We do have like an hour-long webinar where actually Jamie and I got into the weeds in terms of how this works and what renewable energy certificates mean within the renewable energy standard and the renewable energy market as a whole. And I'm bringing that up because I'm happy to share a link to that recording. But I want to go ahead and now just shift your focus in terms of the impact. So the collective impact of green municipal aggregation in Massachusetts and why we think about it as a strong climate action tool is because we're seeing over 700,000 megawatt hours per year by 2022 coming from renewable energy sources that are local. So how does that translate? That is like about the equivalent of 200 wind turbines worth of voluntary demand per year. So that is beyond what the utilities are required to do. That is what when we say that this model is putting pressure on the renewable energy market and really spurring the demand for more renewable energy, this is what we're talking about. And this is just a quick image of the local sources that are part of the communities that are adding that additional renewable energy that Jamie and I have been referencing. So of course, our goal is to expand the sources of renewable energy as more communities choose to pursue community choice aggregation or green municipal aggregation. And in closing, because I'm sure I've gone well over my time, is that we have a report where we've captured all of these findings in terms of the displacement of fossil fuels and the impact of green municipal aggregation. And also one of my recent favorite blogs that was written by our executive director is, why state policy should favor municipal aggregation. And it gets into some of the references that Jamie and I have made about competitive suppliers and how competitive suppliers for an individual customer on our own, like you and I, have not been providing savings. And in fact, the data shows in Rhode Island and Massachusetts that when folks switch on their own outside of an aggregation to a competitive supplier, they're paying more money. So in Rhode Island, the data is showing about $200 extra per year. And in Massachusetts as a whole, because the report commissioned by the Attorney General out there is showing that it's about like $85 million per year on average for the past 5 years. And sadly, in Massachusetts, and we wouldn't be surprised also in Rhode Island, low-income consumers are twice as likely to pay those higher rates. So truly, we're excited about community choice aggregation or green municipal aggregation because it's protecting consumers and it's also bringing more renewable energy onto our power grid. So I will stop there and say you can help us grow green municipal aggregation, and we're here to work with you. And let me go ahead and pause my share.
Thank you, Priscilla. That was great. Very informative. And I'm going to have a couple of questions at the end. So our next speaker is Abel Collins. He is a chair and councilman of South Kingstown Town Council since 2014. And Abel, from my personal, I've been following, he is a very proactive public servant, supportive of environmental sustainability, with various accomplishments from cleaner energy initiatives to protecting civil rights and maintaining our public schools here in South Kingstown. He is also currently, since in the last 3 years, he's a project manager and co-owner of Sol Power. If you're not familiar, Sol Power is a worker-owned solar installation company in Rhode Island. And he's serving as president in his 4th term as a member of the South Kingstown Town Council, and has been a leader at both the state and municipal level in enacting policies to address climate change. I'm aware that he was also in the Rhode Island Sierra Club before serving in the town, and he was the executive leadership in the executive leadership committee, of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island. And he also helped found the RIPTA Riders Transportation Alliance. He earned his bachelor degree in political science from Brown University and the Masters of Public Affairs also from Brown University. And so with this, thank you, Abel. And you will be telling us, talking about how what has been the process and the reason to implement the aggregation here in South Kingstown, and what is the status?
Thank you, Pamela. And thank you for everybody here tonight. It's a great joy to see Jamie and Priscilla, some old colleagues of mine when I was working with Sierra Club and working in the State Senate Policy Office, focusing on environmental policy analysis and development. And yeah, I'm here tonight to hopefully be a resource in terms of, helping people advocate at their own municipal levels for this really exciting program. I can't say that every community is going to be able to follow the way we've done it in South Kingstown, but that doesn't mean we can't come up with good strategies for making it happen everywhere. I think from my perspective, the way that it's sort of came to be in South Kingstown is because I came out of this environmental policy world where, I was working in the state Senate when we were passing municipal aggregation laws. And when I transitioned into sort of the renewable energy world and the private sector side of climate activism, I guess you would see it that way. I was working in Massachusetts and marketing solar to people who were living in communities where they had aggregation plans. And so I was able to see firsthand how, consumers, residents all over Massachusetts were saving money. And so I thought that, when that became available in Rhode Island, something I could help bring to South Kingstown. And so knowing that it was out there was probably very, very important in the process of making it happen in South Kingstown. And that's probably the biggest barrier to it happening in other places around Rhode Island. I think the awareness just isn't out there yet because, if more people did know about it, I think they'd be doing it without a doubt. This is really pretty simple concept when you boil it down for folks. Buyers clubs, bulk purchasing, those are concepts that most people are familiar with. And, if you can tell your town council members or city council members that they can get lower electricity prices for their constituents by joining a bulk purchasing club, I think that they would jump at that opportunity. It really costs the municipality nothing. So it's a great way for a municipal official to say, I'm saving you money and I'm also going to help you save the environment. And those are two really great issues to campaign on if you're out there running for office. So so that was really how it got started here in South Kingstown. I was the one running for office who knew about the program, and I would go to community forums and talk about municipal aggregation. And I think that helped honestly educate some of the people who were running alongside me. And then once, we got into office, it was something that I could, spearhead, get the town manager to begin looking into it. He, of course, contacted Good Energy and Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and they also came in, presented to the council, sort of held our hands through a presentation and helped build that understanding more than I could, more eloquently than I can explain it. And I think as soon as people really had a solid grasp of the program, it was a no-brainer for us, and we have been going forward. I'm looking forward to hearing the final details that come from the PUC, and but that's probably a few months away. I'll let Jamie discuss that more, perhaps. Yeah, so I know we're getting late in the evening, so I'll really just wrap it up with that. Again, this is something that most municipal officials should really grab at as soon as they get a solid understanding. So really, I think CARI can help out by getting a solid understanding, talking to people who are going to be running for office, who are already in office, and letting them know the benefits.
Okay, thank you, Abel, and thank you for everyone who's here. So there's a couple of questions I see here in the chat. The first one is from Susan Kelly. She's wondering, the aggregation, do you foresee a time when National Grid will not cooperate in delivery or upkeep? I don't know who's that question for, maybe for Jamie.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So through this process, we've had a lot of conversations with National Grid. Obviously, it takes a bit of a partnership to make sure the supply and the distribution is functioning. And National Grid, just as a reminder, National Grid is prohibited by law from making any money on the supply of electricity. They are not allowed to have any profit associated with it. Whatever electricity they bring in, they have to pass on at cost to customers. And so for that reason, honestly, they don't care if there's an aggregation program. They're just like they do not care if there's a competitive supplier that supplies you electricity. It does not change their business operations really in any way. It just means that they're supplying electricity for fewer people, which means that the next time they go out to bid, they'll be bidding for less electricity. The critical thing that we've had to do is negotiate rules, terms and conditions, as they're called at the Public Utilities Commission, about how National Grid operates with aggregations, which is mostly around sharing data, to make sure the aggregation has enough, gets the data of its customers in its community, is able to enroll them into the aggregation program, and is able to notify them that is coming. And that's one of the last steps we're waiting for, is the terms and conditions to be approved by the commission. But no, I don't see any time. Well, let me actually say there's one moment when National Grid will no longer cooperate, and that's when they sell their business to PP&L from Pennsylvania. So at that point, I guess they're totally out. And now we're dealing with Pennsylvania Power and Light. Luckily for us, we don't have much concern with them coming in because they already operate with aggregation programs in Pennsylvania. So we don't expect there to be a significant disruption in any of the programs when that changeover happens. But no, at this point, National Grid has been nothing but a partner in doing this, and their role has been in facilitating it happening. They haven't opposed it at all, and they provided no hurdles in Massachusetts when we've been working with them.
Thank you, Jamie. Which is the next? Dennis, would you like to continue? I forgot you were the moderator.
No, you're doing a great job, Pamela. I actually got my second flu shot today, so I'm starting to feel very sleepy. So,
Okay.
so I'm happy for you to fill in. But I was just going to go through the list here. There's another question. It looks like, oh, Jamie, would you mind just reviewing what cities and towns in Rhode Island currently have the CCA? I think someone missed it earlier on in the presentation.
Yeah, so right now, Providence, Central Falls, South Kingstown, and Barrington are waiting for the commission to schedule its final approval of their plans. My conversations with them, both in public sessions as well as with their legal counsel, has been like, there's nothing standing in the way except for us finalizing the rules with National Grid. The programs have met all of the hurdles. We've filed everything we need to file, so we're waiting for the rules to be in place for data sharing, and then we expect approval of those first 4 plans this month. So I'm really excited about that.
Sorry, can you say that again? Providence, Central Falls,
Barrington, and South Kingstown should have their plans approved by the commission this month, with a targeted bidding over the summer with operations in the 4th quarter of this year. Portsmouth Town Council has approved their plan and waiting for the first ones to be approved, and then they'll submit theirs now that they know what the path looks like. And Newport, we have done a draft plan that is being submitted to their council for review and a public hearing. And we expect that public hearing to be either at the end of May or the beginning of June.
So so there is the initial agreement has to be between Green Energy and in your company, and then you guys come to an agreement with the town council, and it seems like the only variable there is the premium of renewable energy that the town will agree to.
Yeah, so the short version of the process is the first thing that the state law requires that the town council has to authorize creation of a plan. So the council has to pass a resolution saying, we want to create a plan. And then that plan should include that we want it to be an opt-out plan, because that's what the law requires. And then the town chooses a consultant. And once again, Good Energy is happy to do the work. We're more than happy to put our name forward and do any RFPs that are necessary. Once we've been selected, we work with town administration or resilience committee, energy environment commission, whatever structure is in that town to develop a draft plan. The critical components of that that are different between the communities are how much renewable energy do you want your default? What optional products do you want to have? And then what do you want your education outreach program to look like? Or is there anything that happens in your community that we should know about and make sure we fold in people to consult with and that portion of it? Outside of that, most of the plans are pretty similar. There's not a lot of deviation. So after we do the draft plan, we present it to the city council. The city council has to have a public hearing on it. Once the council approves the plan after changing it from the public hearing to their own liking, we take the plan and submit it to the Public Utilities Commission for them to review to ensure that the plan is consistent with state law. And then there's after the PUC approves it, we go to the bidding process and then we go to the implementation.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Of course.
Are the different approved plans in Rhode Island all targeting a same or similar level of green plus up, or are they different?
Yes. So yeah, they're all starting with a default of 10% more than the renewable energy standard. There's some changes of offering a 50% additional renewable energy or 100% additional renewable energy. They're all the same. Now, out of Newport, there is an interesting idea brewing. We don't have council approval for it yet or anything, but they actually want to add a resiliency fee on it, which is a yet to be determined per kilowatt hour fee that goes into a local resiliency fund that can be used to support either new renewable energy installation programs, subsidizing the opportunity for that for low income residents, perhaps additional energy efficiency work that might not be happening. We're still working that out. We don't necessarily have full council buy-in or the commission's approval for it, but that's the only one that's a little bit of a shift from just buying more renewable energy credits. They actually want to collect funds to advance their local sustainability efforts, and we're working on navigating how to do that.
Thanks. I'm going through our list here in the chat. The next question is, when aggregates begin, through whom do you work? Is the start, and I think you just answered that, Jamie.
Yeah, so the city council or town council is ultimately the responsible entity. So they're the ones that have to take the final vote on it and approve it. Now the actual, like when the program's up and running, usually Good Energy tries to do a lot of the legwork, the day-to-day management of the program, and then report to both a city manager or a mayor about how the program's going, if there's any changes that need to happen, for them to then do at least an annual report to the city council about how it's happening, and then any program amendments that might be necessary. But yeah, ultimately the council's responsible for it, and we just work to keep them as up to date through the town administration as we can.
Do you have any recommendations on how people on this call might, actually just go ahead and initiate that process?
Yeah.
Or how has it worked in the past? I mean, Abel had his example, but from
Yeah, I think
on the council.
yeah, what Jamie mentioned, one thing that I think was important that I totally forgot about here in South Kingstown, although, I might have started the idea and given it, sort of handed it off to the town manager, he then vetted it through our sustainability committee. And so not every community is going to have a sustainability committee. They might have a conservation committee or something similar that focuses on environmental issues in town. And that might be a way to, if you can't get a town council person's attention, or at least long enough to educate them on the issue, you might be able to gain somebody's attention on one of those committees and have them sort of get the idea percolating in town government that way.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, which is exactly the way that we have tried to work, is to make sure that the citizen committees and commissions are aware, they vet it and make recommendations to the either managers or directly to the council. I'm also not shy about calling council members directly and be like, hey, there's this idea. I'm going to mail you something. I'll email you something. Let's talk about it. Same thing with city managers. Mostly it's about how do we get the attention? And so for folks on this call, I think it's the same thing. Is there a city like this? Do you know the city manager and want to say, I heard about this. I'd like you to look into it. Or same thing with the council members that I've heard about this. I want you to look into it. I'm more than happy to provide. We created a little 2-page summary of what the program looks like. I've tried to mail it to every council person that I have addresses for, but essentially just like pass some of that information along and say, we'd like to look into this. And then hopefully they give us a call and we're more than happy to feed them as much information and brief them as possible. But really it's how do we get to attention of somebody in the administration or on the council that can move it, that can start working the idea through whatever approval processes are necessary.
And I'll just quickly add that even if you don't know directly your city or town manager or someone on the council, I mean, hearing from someone who's a community member, resident, or small business owner from that community really goes a long way. So we've seen in communities where folks within that community are, either just attending a town or city council meeting and saying, hey, have you heard of this? Like, can you consider this? Can you look into this? Or like Jamie mentioned, writing letters to decision makers in the city or town and saying, we want you to explore this. And actually that has been the sort of snowball effect that has taken place in Massachusetts, where community folks are saying, we really want you to look at this, and really ensuring that folks at the city or town level within municipal buildings know that it's an option. And then the other thing that I just wanted to quickly highlight is that the journey for Providence was different, which I think is, you are all familiar with the climate justice plan. So just wanted to highlight that really came from community members, frontline community members, or environmental justice community members saying, we want you to explore community choice aggregation, but we want it to be a climate justice tool. Like, we want you to add additional renewable energy. And then we also want you to go through a process of engaging community members and working with a group of advisors. So that's just to point out that a city or town can really decide how they want to go about that engagement and plan creation process, like Jamie mentioned. The model is similar, but communities do have a choice in terms of how they do that outreach. And then with Providence taking the initiative and going out to through a competitive bidding process for how it chose to work with good energy and green energy consumers, that really did open up the door for smaller communities like Central Falls that had been looking at the model, but really did not have like the administrative bandwidth to go through that process. And then we saw other communities also jump on board, like Barrington. So just also putting that out there, that in terms of working with good energy and green energy consumers as a partner, like a community can definitely choose to go the route of going through a competitive bidding process or request for proposals like Newport did, but there are many communities that are saying, well, Providence did their due diligence. We're going to refer to their results, and here's everything that we're doing, and communities can figure out what works for them. I am a Providence resident, so I'm super excited about the climate justice plan, and also about the way in which Providence is going about creating their plan and looking at how they'll implement their plan, working with community youth advisors.
And we actually have until 8:15, so we have a few more minutes, which is good because a number of questions have popped up. One of which is Terry asks, what kinds of arguments do opponents to aggregation make?
Yeah, so the primary one that we hear is like, why is this an opt-out program? You're making a decision that's going to impact an entire community. And if somebody doesn't take any action, then there's change that's going to happen in their electricity supply. Why would you do that? And why would you do that without necessarily them signing on board? So that's the biggest one that we hear. And the answer is it doesn't work otherwise. Because if we're going to have the buying power that we need to actually get competitive rates, we have to know how many people are going to be in the program. If it's an opt-in program, that would require somebody actually essentially going door to door, call to call, and trying to get everybody on board. That's a variable. We don't know how many people that's going to result in. So then if I say, we think we might have this portion of the community signed up, and you go to a supplier and say, we want you to bid on that, they'd be like, I don't actually know what that is, so I'm not going to give you the best rate. There's too much risk for us that we're going to overbuy and we're going to lose money. We're going to underbuy and have to buy in a spot. So there's too much risk that's involved. And so it becoming an opt-out program is actually what allows us to bid successfully with suppliers. And for example, opt-in programs have been allowed for 30 years in Rhode Island, and there's never been one that got off the ground because you never get a good rate. Suppliers just there's no way that they're going to offer you a competitive rate that's going to be in the same ballpark as National Grid's basic last resort service. So opt-in doesn't work. Opt-out is what allows the program to have a stable enrolled population. And the numbers that we usually get is in an opt-out program, about 85% of eligible customers are in the program to start. And then usually by the time the first contract's up, it's up to 90 to 93% of the community is on board. So it grows over time, because when you hear your neighbor saving money on the electricity, the first question isn't, man, I hate that. It's usually, how? Can you tell me how I can get some of that lower price here? I want to save some money. And so that's the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle we have is like, why would you make this an opt-out program and change it? And really the answer is because that's how it makes it work. And in the end, there's already an opt-out program. It's called National Grid. Do you like what National Grid has to offer, or do you want to try doing something better on your own? And that's what we have to make work. Oh, Denise, you're on mute there.
I see that there's a question was previous to that one. Does owning rooftop solar that only fits into the grid, doesn't power one's home, complicate participating in community aggregation? But I think you mentioned that's something to do with net metering.
Yeah, so for either the net metering or the renewable energy growth program, the answer is no. So like in that program where they're just selling to the grid, you have a contract to sell to grid at a certain rate. They're still going to buy your electricity at that rate. What aggregation is going to do is like, okay, now when you buy electricity, you get to have the aggregation price. So if we're saving you, if it saves money, then the difference between what you sell at and what you buy at is growing, and your solar installation is now more valuable. Net metering, it kind of works the same way, but since it's energy credits, you don't quite get the same amount of benefit, but you still get to buy your electricity at the aggregation rate rather than National Grid's rate.
But you can still be in the opt-in, and
yes, if you're
penalized by the.
Nope, you still get enrolled in the same way as everybody else. You can opt out in the same way as anybody else. But yeah, your participation is no different than any other community member.
There's another question here. Has Warwick been approached to consider green municipal aggregation? Who would know that?
Oh, Rebecca, you could be my new friend. So I have had conversations with 2 council members, but this was all pre-COVID, Jeremy Ricks and Ed Lattiser. I'm a former Warwick resident in Ed Lattiser's district, so I have had conversations with them both. However, this was also before Frank Picozzi was mayor. And so the conversations had happened both with those council members and a previous mayor. I don't know anybody in Frank Picozzi's office, at the new mayor's office, though I would love an introduction and an opportunity to bend their ear for 15 minutes. And I think I could bring them on board. So Rebecca, please follow up with me. If you know somebody that we can get introduced to, I would love to bring Warwick on board.
Yeah. Oh, and there's another question that's up a little higher. If we increase our renewable energy standard to 100% statewide by 2030, will municipal aggregation still be beneficial?
Jamie
Yes.
has had many questions with the Public Utilities Commission. My short go-to is like, yes, and we actually, since we're 9 years out from that, we still have to figure out how do we get ahead of state policy. So we want to see more community choice or green municipal aggregation models. But I will kick it over to Jamie for the more technical response coming from the Public Utilities Commission. And also want to point out, we still have to pass the extension to the renewable energy standard that will honor that 100% renewable electricity by 2030.
which makes it hard for me to give like a good technical answer because we don't know entirely what the RES standard is going to be. How quickly does it step up? There's conversations about renewable energy credit banking for longer periods of time. The potential, so there's these different things that are in the mix. How those individual policies pan out will then impact how does the aggregation adapt to the environment. But in the end, it's the same thing, is that if we get to a point where we're buying 100% renewable energy, I think we're gonna get a better price if we buy it as a whole rather than individually trying to figure it out through competitive suppliers. And the same thing, all the ways in which we have a benefit or a strategic advantage over national grid about when we go and purchase them. And that buying power that we have will still hold true no matter what the RES is. Now, exactly how we're going to implement it, come ask me when the RES is starting to jump by 10% every year. And I'll be like, all right, so here's how we've had to change our bidding strategy because it keeps changing. But that's one of the things that we want to work with our communities on is like, okay, we see this coming up. Maybe we're going to do shorter term contracts because the RES is changing so quickly. Maybe we need to diversify how we're procuring renewable energy in some way. That's one of the fun things about these programs is that as this market changes, we have to be inventive. And municipalities generally don't have staff to sit there and go like, how do we get inventive with renewable energy? As opposed to be like, let's call Jamie and his team because this is all we think about. And all we debate in our little team meetings all the time is like, how are we going to procure more renewable energy at a lower cost than what the utilities have to offer? That's our guiding question time and time again. And that's how we want to do it.
I think we have 2 more questions unless, oh gosh, we may have a, let's see, where is this next one? Oh, it's about gaps. Where was that one? Oh, when green energy sources, darkness, cloudy days, lack of wind, what backups are available to cover the gap? And what % of total Rhode Island demand is currently covered by green energy sources?
Well, to the latter one, I would just say we look at the renewable energy standard in terms of what utilities are required to provide. It's only 17.5% right now. That's coming from renewable energy sources into our mix, which is why, again, like green municipal aggregation is a strong motto and getting ahead of what that requires. But knowing that that is the standard and what is required of utilities for the mix that they provide to us. And then I think in terms of the first part of that question, more of a technical one that gets into just renewable energy as a whole and what happens when we start producing more, which is hopefully the direction, right, that we all want to go in. Then we have to figure out things like battery storage and what happens to the grid, how do we monetize it? So the good thing is that the Public Utilities Commission has been taking on all those questions with utilities and suppliers and figuring out how do we modernize our power system. Jamie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only piece was just to separate 2 things here is like the electrons that you use in your house are not the same as your renewable energy credits. And so all of this RES standard and what we're talking about is buying the credits for it. The electrons actually flow to your house. The grid has to keep the grid electrified. And so we can't actually control which power source is providing electrons directly to your home unless you do like rooftop solar installation type of thing. So the idea behind this is that that question of how do we get enough electricity onto the grid is not an aggregation's responsibility. It's ISO New England's. It's dealt with at a regional level between all the way from, all New England territories together are in that process of how do we make sure there's enough electricity coming onto the grid from enough eligible sources so that when everybody turns on the lights, there's enough electricity there. What we're talking about is how do we buy the credits for where that electricity is generated, which is not necessarily the same. And if you want a full deep dive on that, take Priscilla out to lunch and she will tell you to no end the difference between the electrons and the renewable energy credits. And it's a great primer. It's really good for everyone.
And I also posted a deeper dive into a webinar that Jamie and I did when we get into talking about all that fun stuff related to electrons and how renewable energy certificates work and what is ISO New England, what is a power grid. So I posted that link on the chat. But yes, when it is safe for us to convene in person, I would absolutely enjoy talking all that up over lunch.
And just one thing to add to that conversation from my perspective, as somebody who's involved in the sort of renewable energy installation world and also battery storage, at least at the residential level at this point. We are pretty excited about how much storage is coming online in Rhode Island. There have been some pretty neat, and there's a connected solutions program that Grid is now running for solar homes, where you can basically make a profit off putting a battery in your basement. So over time, we are going to see a lot more storage coming online, distributed throughout the grid, and there's going to be commercial battery storage options that'll help sort of allay those concerns you do hear about sort of intermittency of production from renewable sources. And I have definitely heard that as a talking point against totally going to a clean energy grid. And then one other thing is that I can't remember if it was maybe ISO New England that came out with the report, but a study showed that solar production has actually been very beneficial to rates in the Northeast, because there's a lot of solar production that's sort of peaking right at the time that demand is peaking throughout the region. And so that's sort of something to tell people who have that sort of idea in their head that solar's not producing at the right time or wind's not producing at the right time. It actually turns out that renewables are producing electricity for us at the right time, much of the time.
I have a question for Abel. So in South Kingstown, when we will be seeing the aggregation? Is it is it going to be opt-out option? And because I remember seeing the slide of Priscilla with the opt-out option, how much percentage is the aim for South Kingstown of renewable energy?
Yeah, so it is going to be an opt-out program here. And then, the baseline is the 10% above the RES. We do have opt-up options, I believe. Jamie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to have 100% opt-up option and then 50%. Is that right, or is there just the?
I think it's just 100%.
Okay. So yeah, the 100% one, which will be nice. I think that's what I'm going to choose when it becomes available. I do have solar, so I'm getting 95% of my electricity from that. But that other 5% I would also like to be coming from renewable sources, so I will choose that. In terms of timeline, I again will defer to Jamie on that. He probably knows a little bit better than I do.
Yeah, for the timeline, South Kingstown should be approved this month, and then we'll be going out to bid probably in somewhere between 60 and 90 days from approval. And then assuming the bids are positive and that we actually get the rates that are going to be competitive with National Grid, we would launch the program before the end of the year. Probably October, November timeframe is when we'd be online.
Very exciting to hear that.
Yeah. It's updates from last Thursday's conversation that I had with the Public Utilities Commission. So hot off the rumor mill.
So we should wrap up. What do you think, Denise? It's getting late.
I think so. We have to release our speakers are generous with their time. So, and everyone else, thank you so much for joining.
I see that Justin posted, no, Priscilla posted an invitation, spring meeting on May 18 at 12 p.m. greenenergyconsumers.org. If you look at the chat, everyone could see that. May 18. You can mark it in your calendar, spring meeting. Okay.
And I just propose that everybody unmute for a second and we can clap out loud for our speakers, because that was just so informative. And, to me, it's been this buzzword for years that
Bravo!
I think this is a good thing, but I don't know what it is. So now I know.
Bravo. Thank you very much.
Right. And Abel, thank you for bringing it to South County.
Thank you.
Yeah.